Back when Canon announced the C400, they also rather quietly announced a new lens, the RF 35mm f1.4 L VCM. Now, this is a lens that has been rumored for quite some time, and it's actually kind of the reason why I never pulled the trigger on the 35 f1.8. On top of being a lens that many people have been anticipating, it is Canon's first lens to use a voice coil motor and is the first lens in a new series of primes called the hybrid primes. All of this to say, I have been super stoked to get my hands on one and try it out, and to do so, I packed up the truck and headed out to Ohio to see just how well this performs in the real world. Canon has not been shy about making big, heavy lenses in the past, and so it's refreshing to see just how small and light this one is. Being an f1.4 lens, it tips the scale at 1.2 pounds, making it the exact same weight as the Sony G Master 35 1.4 and almost a full pound lighter than the Canon 50mm f1.2. Now, being a hybrid lens, Canon has now added a declicked aperture ring. In photo mode, at least at the time of recording, you do still have to set the aperture using the wheel on the back of the camera, but in video mode, this new ring makes setting and adjusting the aperture on the fly so much faster and easier. On the side of the lens, you're gonna find a focus hold button. Again, this is great if you're shooting fast and don't wanna risk having the focus snap to something else in the frame. Up from that is a large rubber focus ring. When I was manually focusing this lens, I found it to be very precise and well dampened. And if you spin the lens around, you're gonna find at the rear a filter gel holder. Not something I use personally, but I'm not gonna complain about having both front and rear filter options. Lastly, we have a lock switch if you want to lock the aperture ring in auto mode, and a focus switch to toggle between auto and manual focusing. Overall, a well-built lens and a well-laid out lens. If you own any other RF L series glass, this one is going to feel very familiar. One of the main reasons why you pay so much for an f1.4 lens is that fast prime look. Unfortunately, for a lot of lenses, shooting wide open comes with a bit of a trade-off, mainly in sharpness and chromatic aberration. With that in mind, I shot pretty much this entire trip wide open at f1.4, and the image I got out of this lens looked incredible. When you cycle through some of the different f-stops, f1.4, f1.8, f2.8, f4.0, the depth of field changes, but the image quality and sharpness stays pretty consistent across the range. This was really nice to see. The same goes for chromatic aberration. Yes, it's certainly there, and I don't know any 1.4 lens that doesn't have CA when shot wide open, but is really well controlled and goes away as you stop down. For comparison, I've shot countless interviews with the Xeen 35 T1.5, and I very rarely shoot that lens any wider than a T2.8 because the CA is just so bad. The fact that the Canon is so usable wide open, it kind of makes up for the $1,500 price tag. Now, what you won't find in any cine lens is autofocus. And this has become a bit of a controversial topic surrounding the RF 35 1.4. So before we talk autofocus performance, let's talk about the voice coil motor. Like I said in the intro, this is Canon's first ever lens to utilize a voice coil motor, but it's not a new technology. From hard drives to surgical robots to adaptive headlights, voice coil motors are used in several different industries because of their precision and ability to move heavy objects quickly and quietly. They're also super simple and very reliable, hence their use in the medical field. So why so much negativity surrounding the VCM part of this lens? Well, if we look at how a voice coil motor works, you have an electric current being used to generate a magnetic field, and that then interacts with a permanent magnet, and then this whole coil runs along a stationary post, and because it's an electromagnet, it floats when there's power running to it, but just kind of slides around when there isn't. The first time you pick up this lens, it does sort of feel broken with the large rear element group just sliding around inside of the lens. Canon has stated the interior of the lens was built to handle this movement, and after using the lens for a few days, I honestly stopped noticing it. So what is the upside? Why use a voice coil motor? Well, first off is the focusing. The focusing is incredibly fast, faster than any lens I've ever used, and because VCM motors are good at moving heavy objects, Canon was able to put larger lens elements towards the back of the lens instead of at the front, making for a very well-balanced lens. Another upside is by using a USM motor in the front of the lens for the lighter elements and a VCM motor in the rear for the heavier elements, these motors can move the elements independently, greatly reducing focus breathing. One of the biggest giveaways that somebody is using a photo lens for video is that the lens breathes when doing a focus pull. With the RF35 f1.4, even when I was doing a very long focus pull from up close to infinity, the lens showed almost no signs of breathing. Lastly, on the focusing front is the sound, or lack thereof. Because VCM motors use magnets to float along a rail, they are virtually silent. I was shooting with a mic directly above this lens on some very quiet mornings, and the lens didn't make a single sound. As expected, this lens has beautiful fall off. At f1.4, you get a gentle transition from in-focus elements to out-of-focus elements. The bokeh does onion a bit in the corner, but overall, one of my favorite parts of this entire lens is just how nicely the background melts away. An interesting characteristic of the lens that did show up from time to time was this subtle swirling in the background. It's definitely not Helios 44 levels of swirly bokeh, but it is a characteristic of this lens. I personally enjoy a little character in a lens, so I don't find this a flaw, but somebody who wants a clinically sharp and accurate image might. When it comes to flaring, it's pretty well controlled. Stopping down, you can get some nice sun stars. Opened all the way up, you get a nice subtle bloom without crazy colors or light wash covering the entire image. With so much good, there was bound to be a little bit of bad, and this really is going to depend on the individual, but this lens, for an L series lens, has an unusual amount of vignetting and distortion when uncorrected. As somebody that uses an R6 that has all of the lens correction and compensation data built in, it's sort of a moot point. I found the video to be wonderfully detailed, the images to be sharp and clear, but I do get why some people are so upset. You're paying a premium for an L series lens, it should be optically excellent, and this one just doesn't feel like it is. Sadly, we seem to be going in a direction where companies rely more and more on software to fix these kind of lens issues, and that's a little bit what it feels like. Another omission from Canon, and this was a big one for me, is the lack of lens stabilization. With the lens being marketed as a hybrid lens, having stabilization when it comes to both photo and video is a pretty big deal. I could see maybe this being a limitation to them using a VCM motor, and maybe you can't stabilize a lens group that has that. I don't really know. But on my R6, which does have IBIS, I was able to get some more than usable images. The IBIS on Canon's newer cameras is quite good. The worry I have is if you would put this on a C400 or a C80, which doesn't have IBIS, is the digital IS going to be good enough? I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. While the RF 35mm f1.4 is not perfect, no lens really is, and I think for those of us that have been waiting for that successor to the EF 35mm f1.4, this lens does not disappoint. It is sharper, it is lighter, faster, it actually comes in $500 cheaper. The VCM motor brings some speed and weight improvements. The addition of a manual aperture ring is long overdue, and the image I was able to get from this lens reminded me just how much fun it is to shoot with a very fast prime. This 35mm is definitely a winner in my book, a great focal length and a great do-it-all kind of lens, and I really hope Canon keeps going down this road of hybrid primes. I just wish they might reconsider adding in stabilization next time. As always, if you have any questions regarding the RF 35mm f1.4 L VCM, leave those in a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another one.